everyone, this is Miss Moriarty and I'm here to review our progress check number 5 from AP Classroom. So what I did was I looked at our multiple choice portion and the FRQ and I pulled a couple of the questions that seemed to cause the most difficulty for us, so I want to go over them here. Please mark this assignment as done for the day because remember it is your attendance, and if you do have any other further questions, please leave a comment on this assignment and I will try to get back to you as soon as I can. Okay, so it looks like our question here seemed to give us the most trouble. Here in our question, it says, which of the following statements best describes an unintended environmental consequence of aquaculture fish farm enclosures located in estuaries? Now, looking at how we answered this question, this was I would say, poorly worded question, to be honest, because I could see being correct depending upon how the question was asked, because we do know that fish farms can create contaminants in potential drinking water. However, D was the correct answer here because, yes, we also know that because our fish are living in such close quarters with one another, they can harbor parasites that negatively affect our wild populations in estuaries. So you kind of had to read up at the top that it's located in an estuary, and we know that this is something that's definitely going to affect wild populations that breed in those estuaries. Looking at our next question here, we see an environmental agency wants to evaluate the effectiveness of a rain garden in reducing our urban runoff from our impervious surface, parking lots, and roofs of buildings. So they designed an experiment to test our slightly sloped area, and they wanted that rainwater to then flow towards gardens. The runoff from the roof was then collected in various downspouts directed towards those gardens, and then they monitored the effectiveness by measuring the water quality of the stormwater as it moved through the garden during and after storm events. So in this case, the question was asking you which of the following would be the best measure to use to determine the effectiveness. So in this case, if we were to reword this question, they were pretty much just asking you what was the dependent variable. If you were the scientist, what would you be measuring in this case? And the correct answer here was C, the speed and the volume of the water exiting the gardens. Because remember, we're trying to evaluate the effectiveness of this garden at preventing urban runoff. In this case, B, the intensity and duration of the storm event wouldn't really relate to how effective the garden is going to be. As well as temperature of the parking lot and roof temperature doesn't really have an effect in this case, in this experiment. Here we have another question about fishing. Here we see overfishing of stock of fish species like salmon and cod in an effort to meet a growing global demand has become an international concern, right? We know recent estimates indicate that the average annual consumption of fish globally was about twice the consumption it was in 1960. So here it says various nations have adopted policies designed to combat overfishing. So which of the following approaches is commonly used to combat the problem of overfishing? Once again, guys, this was a tough worded question here. So the correct answer technically was enforcing minimum size requirements for the capture of some commercial species. Reason why we're saying that D is more correct versus A, which is just reducing the limits on the numbers of commercial fish species, is because when we're talking about commercial fishing, we're talking about mass consumption of fish, not necessarily just some local guy kind of fishing on his lake or pond where limits can be placed. Typically in commercial fishing with bigger industries, usually enforcing a minimum size requirement of fish that they can capture is oftentimes the more realistic approach. So that is why D is the more correct answer here versus A. Here, which of the following is a direct economic consequence that would likely occur if an area of forest was clear cut? So big takeaway from this question, guys, is the word economic. So you had to kind of evaluate your answers and which one actually had to do with money versus which one had to do with maybe the environment. Because remember, it was asking for an economic consequence. So in this case, B, where it says a decrease in atmospheric oxygen concentration, that would be false. It's not an economic consequence. That is more of an environmental consequence. Same thing with D, increasing legislation to regulate stream flow. That would be more of an environmental consequence. So that kind of leaves us with A and C. Now, the reason why C is false is because if we were to clear cut an area to build houses, that's not going to increase ecotourism in that area. And so C would be completely false, leaving only A as the correct answer. We're going to see a decrease in the number of game hunting licenses purchased because now we don't have a forest or a woods like area for people to go hunting. Here we have got another fishing question here. So once again, we have that kind of same prompt we had previously. And here it asked us which of the following techniques could best reduce the harmful effects of overfishing if it were to be widely adopted by the fishing industry. So in this case, best practice would be an increased use of very large mesh gill nets for harvesting salmon and trout. Large mesh gill nets may try to prevent things like bycatch that you can usually occur during things like bottom trawling. So in this case, B would be incorrect. Here in C, increased use of long line fishing techniques in the open ocean wouldn't probably be a technique that would be widely adopted since it is incredibly difficult to catch lots and lots of fish using that method. And so in this case, best practice would probably be your large mesh gill nets. Here, this was more of kind of like a reading prompt all about our green revolution here, and you had to answer which of the following is an assumption made by that author regarding the use of GMOs. Now, the best answer here would have been B. We can see that the amount of arable land will remain relatively constant, and the growing population will have enough food if more crops can be harvested from that same amount of land. Remember, that's kind of like the premise of the Green Revolution. That's what we saw happen. Right, we saw that we were now able to increase our crop yield tremendously while still really using the same amount of land, just simply changing the agricultural practices that we were using. Now, guys, here was the one FRQ that we had here. I'm not going to go through each and every one, but what I will do is I'll post the Google Slides that's a part of this video, and you can take a look at it later. But here was our one FRQ. First question was asking about provisioning services of forest ecosystems, as well as one environmental impact on our old growth forests here. So in this question, this was kind of all talking about our forestry, land management topics of our land and water use. You'll notice I placed the answer key here for you to take a look at a later time if you want to go through what you had. Here was our FRQ number 2, because remember, land and water use was such a huge unit. In this FRQ, this was mainly focusing on agricultural practices such as the Green Revolution and the use of pesticides and integrated pest management. So here you'll notice they gave you a couple of questions about irrigation, Green Revolution, pesticides. You had to use your data table here and calculate, as well as describe some trends that you may have seen. Once again, if you want to take a look at the slides, I'll leave it up on the assignment so you can take a look at the answer key to the FRQ if you want to use it to study.